This week we're going to take a look at two very different poems by Lord Alfred Tennyson. The first poem we're going to look at is In Memoriam, A.H.H., and the second will be The Lady of Shalott. First of all, a little background on each of these poems. For In Memoriam, A.H.H., this is actually a series of short poems. There are approximately 133 poems in the actual complete works, but your textbook will only give you a selection of those poems. The form that this work takes is in the form of an elegy. An elegy is a mournful, melancholy, or plaintive poem, especially a funeral song or a lament for the dead. In particular, this elegy is written for Tennyson's close friend. His friend Arthur Hallam died at the age of 22, and this work is a work that's written in celebration of his life and a lament for his death. Overall, the work covers three major themes. It covers the theme of death, as Tennyson works through his grief over the death of his friend. It covers the idea of faith, and it covers the idea of immortality, this idea that do we live on even after our death in some way, shape, or form. The second poem that we're going to cover by Tennyson this week is extremely different. It's called The Lady of Shalott, and this poem is a narrative poem. A narrative poem is a poem that tells a story. It has a plot, it has characters, it has a setting. This particular narrative poem is set in medieval times, particularly King Arthur's time, so you're going to see references to knights, you're going to see references to Camelot, you're going to hear a little bit about Lancelot, which I'm sure you've heard of in the past in your study of King Arthur at some point in your education. Something that you need to keep in mind when you read this poem is that it is designed to tell a story. It's designed to be entertaining. So as you read, you want to pay attention to what happens to the characters. Don't necessarily get sucked into the language of the poem, because sometimes that can tie you up, but instead focus in on the story. As you look at these poems, I want you to also pay attention to the role and the effect of the speaker in a poem. Some things you need to consider is point of view, and just a quick recap of point of view and the different types of point of view that we have. First person point of view is when somebody that's actually in the story or in the poem is the one who is telling it. Good clue that it is in first person is that if you have an I in the poem that's doing the talking. Second person does exist, but we don't see it very often. Second person uses the you, and it addresses everything directly to you. When you think of second person, you can often think of instructions. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to go here, you need to go there. A test tip for you: if you have a work of literature and it asks you the point of view, and second person is one of your choices, you can usually eliminate it. Very little literature is written from the second person. The next type is third person limited. Third person limited has an outside narrator, and that outside narrator knows the thoughts and feelings of only one of the main characters. Does not know the thoughts and feelings of the rest. That's why it is limited. In comparison, third person omniscient also has an outside narrator, but this narrator is all-knowing. The narrator knows the thoughts and feelings of all of the characters. There are some different types of speakers. Sometimes we have a fictional speaker, and other times the speaker is real, perhaps the poet himself or another historical figure. We also have generalized speakers. These are speakers that we don't get a whole lot of specific detail about. We just get this overall impression. Whereas some speakers in poems are very specific. We know exactly how they think, we know exactly how they feel, we know exactly what their qualities are. Why this all matters to us as we read a poem leads us to the questions that we should be thinking about. First thing you want to do when you're analyzing a poem is look at who the speaker is. Is it somebody in the poem? Is it the poet itself? Is it an outside narrator? Is it one of the characters? So step 1, identify who the speaker is. That will also help you to identify the point of view. And step 2 is to look at what effect does this have on the poem. What does it matter that it's the poet who's doing the speaking? Why does it matter that it's one of the characters or a historical figure? Okay. By choosing a specific speaker in a poem, the poet has added an effect. That is what you need to consider when you're looking at this. Next, we're going to move on to look at In Memoriam for a little bit and to look at identifying the speaker and going through some information about that. Before you do that, however, I'd like you to answer the 2 questions that will appear next in your assignment block. As I said, next I want to spend a little bit of time looking at In Memoriam, AHH, and looking at who the speaker is, which point of view it's from, and why that matters to us. I also want to go through the first one with you, just to give you a little bit of information to get you through the rest. In Memoriam, AHH is a bit of a challenge to read sometimes, and so I would like you to make sure that you understand the beginning of the poem in order to get through the other selections that are there. First of all, a reminder to you, poetry is actually meant to be heard out loud, not necessarily read silently on the page. So, in regards to that, let's just take a moment to listen to this first poem from In Memoriam.
By Alfred, Lord Tennyson. 1. I held it true with him who sings to one clear harp in divers tones, that men may rise on stepping stones of their dead selves to higher things. But who shall so forecast the years and find in loss a gain to match, or reach a hand through time to catch the far-off interest of tears? Let love clasp grief, lest both be drowned. Let darkness keep her raven gloss. Ah, sweeter to be drunk with loss, to dance with death, to beat the ground, than that the victor hours should scorn the long result of love, and boast, behold the man that loved and lost, but all he was is overworn.
Okay, so taking a look at that poem, first of all, let's identify the point of view. Going back to our point of views, remember your choices are first person, second person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. We have a key clue in the opening line of this poem. The line, I held it truth with him who sings. Within that line is a key word that actually tells you the point of view. Take a moment to look at it. Do you see it? So looking at that, if you said that the word is I, you're absolutely correct. Remember, the use of I is a good signal that it's the first person point of view, and the speaker of the poem is the one who's actually in the poem. In this case, the speaker I is Alfred Lord Tennyson. So let's take a look and see what he's actually saying in this poem. This poem is in the opening of In Memoriam, and as you move through the different pieces of this longer work, you're going to see Tennyson making some discoveries and working through his grief. So it opens with him extremely upset, extremely dejected at the loss of his friend. And as the poems progress, so as the numbers get higher, you see him working through that to find some kind of inner peace and inner solace. Let's look at the first stanza. Remember, stanza is a group of lines in poetry. I held it truth with him who sings, to one clear harp in divers tones. Well, what in the world is divers? We're not talking about people that are swimming under the sea. It's important anytime you have a footnote for a word, you look to see what that word actually means. So in this case, divers means varied or having many parts. You would be able to find the definition in the side margin or at the bottom of your page, depending. So what's he saying in this first stanza? He is saying that men may rise on stepping stones of their dead selves to higher things, that all of these people keep telling him, well, after death, you move on to bigger and better things. So he's trying to find the truth in that. He goes on to say, however, that who's going to find in loss a gain to match? So who's to say that in this loss that he's facing, something better, something bigger is going to come out of it? And he pretty much keeps that idea going through this third stanza. And he says, forget it. I'm going to be sad. I'm going to be in my grief. Like darkness keep her raving loss. Sweeter to be drunk with loss, to dance with death, to beat the ground. So he's not going to give himself over to this idealistic, oh, it's okay, there are better things. He's going to be upset. He's going to be sad. And he doesn't see anything wrong with being sad about the loss of his friend. Even though, in the last stanza, we have these wise men, okay, these clear harp and divers tones, who say, behold the man that loved and lost, but all he was is overworn. He's not willing to listen to reason at this point. He's not willing to listen to those people who are trying to make him feel better. He's completely drowned in his grief, and he fully intends on staying there. Now, you're going to see this change, okay, as you read later into the poem and you read the other selections, and you're going to see him start to make some realizations about death and the effect of death on other people and what that really means. He's going to explore some issues of faith. He's going to explore the idea that maybe his friend does still live on around him in some way. So keep that in mind as you continue to read this poem. The last thing I would like you to do, after finishing with your work from In Memoriam, AHH, I would like you to take a look at the Lady of Shalott. And looking at what we just did for In Memoriam in order to identify the point of view, I would like you to do the same thing for the Lady of Shalott. I would like you to identify what point of view it is, first person, second person, third person limited, or third person omniscient, and an explanation of how you know. That will be the last question that I would like you to answer in the submission block for this assignment. As always, if you have any questions about either of the works, please send me a message, give me a call, or email me.